Welcome back to part 2 where we are painting a warbler. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I've had to record this audio 3 times. I am not going back to check. Anyway, if you'd like to see how I sketched this out, please refer to part 1. Jumping right in, we are starting with a number 3 round brush and using the lightest shade of orange in the palette. We're going to fill in the top portion of the head. And notice as I get to the end, I'll be feathering out the color as opposed to making a blunt line. When doing this, make sure that you are using the end or the tip of the brush. This makes a difference in how thick your lines turn out. There is a joke in there somewhere, but I may have adolescent watchers, so I'll keep it to myself. So notice here as I'm putting in a really fine detail, you want to use just the tip of the brush. Just as an example, notice how I'm using the full brush. It makes a much thicker line as opposed to you just running the tip over the paper. The lines come out much thinner. And we're going to clean up our brush and switch over to the next darkest shade of orange and just layering over that previous color. Remember to just use the tip of the brush to get the feathering effect. And notice how I'm not completely filling in the area with the darker shade of orange. You want that lighter shade of orange to be peeking through. And here I felt like I added too much color, so as always I go over the area I want to lift with a clean brush and clean water and just dab at it with a clean napkin. And switching to this reddish brownish color, I'm just using that to add a little bit of shadow to the area. It came out a little darker than what I wanted, so instead of trying to lift the color, I just added a little bit more water to the area. Switching over to the beak, I'm going to be using a neutral gray, and if your palette has more than one gray like mine does, the difference here, the one on the left is a warm gray. It looks like it has a little bit of brown mixed in. The one on the right is a cool gray. It looks like it has a little bit of blue mixed in. Neutral grays tend to look like it's just black and white mixed together. So I'll be using the neutral gray, which was in the middle. And before I put color down, I'm going to cover the entire area with just clean water. I don't want the area to be too dark starting out. And I'm not using black here. I'm just letting the lighter areas dry down and then going back over it with another layer of gray, this time with less water in it. And to add in that darker layer of gray, notice that I switched over to the 0.5 brush. It just helps add finer detail. Doing the same thing to the bottom portion of the beak, we're just going to go in with that neutral gray color, using less water to make the color appear darker. Now switching over to a number 3 flat brush, we're just going to go over the main part of the face with a wash of clean water because we don't want the gray to come off too dark at all. Technically, this area is white, but as you'll learn in future paintings, nothing is ever really pure white. So going in with the gray, because I already have a layer of water already down on the paper, I'm just going to diffuse out the color. I don't need to lift it. I'm just going to use the brush to kind of move the color around so it's not as concentrated in one area. But if you do need to thin it out some more, just add a little bit more water to your brush. This is a good example as to why you need to make sure you are using the correct brush when doing small details. Because if you were to try to use the number 3, even using just the tip, the lines would not come out this fine. And this is just another example showing you the difference between using the full brush and using just the tip. And it may be a little hard to tell, but the irises are going to be just straight gray with just only a little bit of water added to it, and the surrounding area is pure black. And here we're doing the rest of the face as we did before, so just putting down a layer of water so that when I lay down the gray, the color immediately starts to diffuse instead of just having a blunt wash of gray. And for the highlight in the eye, I just used an acrylic paint pen, but you can use either a jelly roll pen or just plain white gouache in a small brush. Going back to the number 3 round brush, we're going to start filling in this area with the olive green color. Again, it doesn't have to be an exact match to my palette, but just find the color that matches the closest. And you want to take the color all the way up to and just a smidge past the orange to make it look cohesive and that the colors overlap instead of making a harsh line. And to mix a darker shade of green, I'm just going to go directly onto the black in my palette and then directly over that same olive color. And you're just going to make really short overlapping lines. Clean your brush and go back into that olive color. And I felt I made too light of a wash, so once this dried, I went back and added on another layer of the olive green. Going into a darker shade of green, we're just going to add some shadow. If it doesn't come out as dark from whatever colors you're using, go back and do the darkest green and add a little bit of black. Same as I did before, just go directly on top of the black and then directly on top of the green. You don't want it to be too bright because it will be in contrast with the olive color. The screen cuts off a little at the bottom, but I switched to a lime green color to fill in the feathers underneath the main wing. And again, same as before, we're just letting the initial coat of lime green dry down and then going back over with the same color just to make it seem more opaque. And I'm going back in with that darker green shade just to add a little bit of a shadow. You don't want to take the shadow or the outline all the way around. You just want it to go that the direction of the light is hitting the bird. Going into that warm gray shade, we're just going to fill in this small area. I'm using the 0.5 round brush because it's a very small detail and you don't want the brush to be too big and possibly spill over into the previous color. I left a small gap here to put a tan shade that I didn't notice before. If you want to see the reference photo, I have the Pinterest board linked below for reference so you can see where each shade should be. And I'm going to add a little bit of black here. You have to be very careful because once you put black paint down, it's really hard to try to pick up the color and move other colors around and blend in. So just be careful when you're doing this part. This is just me adding in small detail. You don't have to do this part. Switching to a number 3 flat brush, you're going to wet the canvas first and then put on a wash of gray. You can build up the color later, but you still want a good even wash of the neutral gray first. And remember to let the area dry down first before you start adding in another layer. So in this case, I started off with a light wash of the neutral gray, and then once that dried, I went back over it with the same shade of gray, but just less water. You don't want it to lift while you're trying to layer colors. And I'm just going over this small area with the warm gray, and then I'm going to use a number 3 brush to kind of blend it all together. So I'm just using a clean brush with water and just going over that area to kind of blend in the darker area with the washed out area. And I'm just redrawing my lines here. You don't have to do this, but because I'm left-handed, sometimes my hand goes over that area and wipes off the pencil. So I just want to make sure that I reinforce this. I'm just going back and forth between the gray and the lime green. If you have any questions, put them below for this part. But other than that, it's just alternating between the lime green and the gray. And for this entire area, we'll be using or alternating between the lime green, a darker green, the warm gray, and the black. Primarily, we're using the lighter green as the base and outlining the feathers, as you'll see, with the darker green to indicate shadow. Same with the gray. We're putting the warm gray down and then using the black to outline to indicate a shadow. You want to be very careful with this step. You don't want too much of the darker color. So if you feel comfortable using the number 3 round brush, continue to do so. If not, switch to the 0.5 to give you more control as to how much paint you're putting down. And using the 0.5 brush, I'm alternating between straight gray mixed with a little bit of black and the dark green to put shadow in the feathers. If you get a little nervous during this step, take a break and practice making the thinner lines on a separate sheet of scrap paper before you start applying paint to your piece. And we're about to move on to the legs and feet of the bird, but before we do, I'm just adding in, now that the area is dry, I'm just adding in a couple strokes to indicate the hair, the fine hair, the fur of the bird. And then I'm going in with just straight gray, just making little wispy lines. There's really no rhyme or reason here. Just, again, if you need to practice on a scrap piece of paper, do so. You don't want your lines to be too heavy here. Switching back to the olive green, we're going to start out with just color, not too much water on the brush, and then we're going to slowly start to spread that out. This is another reason why it's important to let the first layer of paint dry, so that when you need to go in and do fine details, it's not just blending in with the already wet paint. And this is another situation where we are just alternating between green and gray. In this particular case, it's the olive green. So you're going to lay down the base of the olive green and then outline it slightly with the darker green. Same thing with the gray. We're going to put down a wash of the gray, let that dry some, and then outline in the pure black. Starting off with the legs, we're going to add just a little bit of black. And we are essentially done. You don't have to do this step, but if you'd like to, make sure that there's a good even ratio of water to paint. You want it to be a little bit on the lighter side. And you're just making lines here. There's no rhyme or reason to why I'm making it look sporadic. It's just moss on a tree branch. And then I'm going to go over it with a darker green. And I'm adding a little bit more water to it so that I can go directly over it and lift some of that color to give a natural shadow effect. I will admit this one was kind of hard, so if you have any questions or need assistance, please drop a comment down below. See you next time.